to read. Phillip is an architect, and he has his own architectural firm, and he also teaches at Wake Tech Community College in the architecture area. I did not know that he studied oboe performance at the as well, and so he is a classically trained as an oboist, which is just a fun little tidbit. We're going to have to find ways to utilize that. In addition to his accomplishments professionally, Phillip is a very active member at Avent Ferry United Methodist Church in Raleigh, and he is the chair of, he's also the church council chair at Avent Ferry. He is the chair of the Reconciling United Methodist and Friends of North Carolina, and he is was a recipient of the Gail Felton Drum Major for Justice Award, and also he is a member of the MFSA Board of Directors. He serves on the Capital District Strategy Team and in the Methodist Church, and he is currently serving as an alternate member of the 2020 North Carolina Annual Jurisdictional Delegation. So he's a part of the delegation that's all about that work of getting bishops elected. As a lifelong Methodist, he serves to create an inclusive United Methodist Church, and we welcome you as we know that you welcome all people into faith. So thank you for being with us, Phillip, and welcome to St. Francis. Jacob Tobia is our very special guest tonight. Jacob is a writer, producer, author of Sissy, A Coming of Gender Story. Jacob has interviewed former U.S. presidents. He has worked with queer and trans youth. Jacob helps others embrace the full complexity of gender and their own truth. They are originally from Raleigh. I'm working on it, y'all. So Jacob is originally from Raleigh and is currently living in Los Angeles. Jacob is a member of the Forbes 30 Under 30 and Out 100, made a debut on the national stage when they were interviewed by Laverne Cox as part of MTV's The T Word. In 2015, Jacob was profiled by MTV in the 1 Hour GLAAD Award-nominated episode of True Life, I'm Genderqueer. And in 2016, Jacob created, co-produced, and hosted Queer 2.0, a first-of-its-kind LGBTQ series for NBC News. In 2017, they served as the social media producer on season 4 of Amazon's Emmy award-winning series Transparent, and collaborated with Instagram and GLAAD to produce #KindComments, a custom campaign for Trans Day of Visibility that was viewed over 14 million times. In 2018, Jacob produced and starred in a critically acclaimed revival reading of the Pulitzer and award-winning play I Am My Own Wife, and was announced as the new face of, is it Fluid? Is that how we say this? Fluid Beauty, a line of trans and queer inclusive makeup. A Point Foundation scholar, a Harry S. Truman scholar, and a recipient of the Campus Pride National Voice in Action Award, Jacob has captivated audiences at Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, Yale, Essex, SW, and conferences across the country with their message of personal fabulosity, and that's not the way to say that. Yes, it is? All right. And social change. Their writing and advocacy have been featured on MSNBC, MTV, The Washington Post, The New York Times, Time, New York Magazine, Teen Vogue, and others. Jacob graduated summa cum laude from Duke University with a degree in human rights advocacy. Prior to their career in television, Jacob worked at the United Nations Foundation and Australia Lesbian Foundation for Justice. Jacob is an avid sriracha devotee and has worn high heels in the White House twice. All right, and Jacob was baptized here at St. Francis, confirmed in this church, active in the youth ministry at this church, has said in the book that St. Francis was their first chosen family. There's a common thread throughout the book about how St. Francis was a part of nurturing and a part of the foundational growth, and also a place that sometimes caused harm when we didn't know any better. So I invite you to listen from the standpoint of just pure entertainment and enjoyment. And let's also listen with an ear towards how can we be a church who fully includes and makes all people feel welcome. So I invite you into that spirit as we enjoy this conversation between Phillip and Jacob tonight. Welcome.
Well, hey y'all. I've seen this sanctuary in a lot of different setups over the past 28 years, but I've never seen it set up quite like a talk show. So this is like, I'm sort of into this. I'm sort of like, maybe we could figure out something to do with this more generally around like a Phillip and Jacob hour. I don't know. We might find. We'll talk out. So it also feels like abundantly silly to be introduced with my full website bio in this church specifically, because that bio is mostly written for people that I'm kind of desperately trying to convince to pay me to like do things. And so it's really just funny to be introduced in that way in this space because half of y'all raised me, and I've been toddling literally. Well, I didn't toddle around this sanctuary specifically, but I did toddle around literally next door. So it feels very funny to be like, here's a fancy introduction of that, that like 15-year-old who would not stop talking during service for like 3 years of their sort of teenage life. And also that one who always did silly dances at ASP. So I don't know, it's just really wonderful to be here. And it feels really like coming home, and it feels like in terms of things I imagined for my life, sitting up here talking about important stuff feels right, but I didn't know I would be able to do it quite like this. Also, I heard that we were going to have that preschool orientation is happening, or like open house or something is happening right over there. So I figure at some point we can just, if someone wants to run over and be like, hey, if you're having kids, then you may have to talk about some of this stuff with the college. Just come on over here. Buy one, get one free, someone was just like, sorry, just tell them. And I dressed like a sort of preschool art teacher for tonight. So I don't know. Anyway, I could just run my mouth here because I have for many decades, and keep it going. But I'll sort of get to a little bit of the point and sort of start the actual thing, because otherwise we'll be here for even more than however long we're going to be here. So it's interesting because when I sat down and thought about what do I want to talk about tonight, and I'm going to read a little bit first, and then Phillip and I are going to chat. But we decided it'd be better for Phillip to not be up on stage while I'm reading, because then you'd have to do the active listening for 15 minutes. And I was like, it's okay, you can check your phone if you need to. But I was thinking about what I wanted to say and what I wanted to talk about. There are so many things. There are so many things that church was for me growing up, and I'm going to read a little bit about all of them. There are so many things that were challenging about trying to sort of come into my own and figure out who I was in a faith community that just was kind of blindsided by the whole thing in a sense, and certainly didn't in a culture where we didn't know how to talk about all this stuff. So it's really special to be up here and to be able to be up here in such a warm, beautiful way. And what I figured I'd focus on tonight, because and we'll maybe talk about some of the more challenging stuff when we have our tete-a-tete. But I feel like when we talk about the church and queer and trans people and in the LGBTQ community, there's a lot of bad news, right? There's a lot of challenging, hard stuff. And sometimes I know that I can get bogged down in all of that, and can feel kind of overwhelmed by that sometimes. With General Conference doing what happened, with all of that. It can feel kind of dark and heavy at times when you think about it all at once. So what I wanted to do tonight, because there are some passages in the book about when things weren't, when we sort of didn't get it right as a community, when we were figuring it out. But I don't feel like those get us where we need to go. Because what feels really important to me, what feels like the beautiful work and the sacred work and the opportunity that we have, is to set the course, right? To think about where do we want to go? Who do we want to be? not think about what are our shortcomings, but think about what are we capable of? Who are we at our best? And so I wanted to share some fond memories tonight that are part of the book. And if you get the actual thing, which you should all do, but from a local bookstore if you can, preferably Quail Ridge, and when you go there, please tell them, rent a venue next time Jacob comes to town. So if you do read the actual book, there are some, the language is not, it's not preschool appropriate. So I will be sort of glossing over certain things this evening for the sake of doing this in a sanctuary. But you'll be able to figure out when it's happening and how. So the first thing I want to read is from the top of chapter 2, which is titled Nerds and Wizards and Jesus, Oh My. And it's about an age in my life where all those things are very important to me. So it kicks off like this, and there's a little bit also, if you're not a member of this church and haven't been a member for a long time, there's a little bit that's like kind of inside jokey in this, and for that, I apologize, and also you're welcome. Today, if you walked past a 6-foot-tall cutie like me, rocking 5-inch heeled, black leather boots, dark purple lipstick, and a 5 o'clock shadow, your first reaction probably wouldn't be, well, someone loves Jesus. Based on prevailing stereotypes about gender non-conforming people and Christianity, most folks probably wouldn't assume I'm a particularly churchy person. Well, you're wrong. I am too a churchy person. Not like too churchy, but I get around. Like any good Christian, I go to church approximately 2 or 3 times a year, once on Christmas and any other time that I go home to North Carolina to visit my parents. In my adult life, I'm a chilled out, sort of vaguely millennial Christian. You know the type. Like, believes in God, but tries not to use the label agnostics. They won't seem like, a jerk. Believes in the spiritual teachings of Jesus, but is still unsure, even in their adult life, whether the whole God-impregnated Mary thing checks out. Believes in the concept of the Holy Spirit, but believes equally strongly in the power of crystals. That type of, awkward millennial Christian. I wasn't always mellowed out about it, though. My church was a primary community for me for the entirety of my young life. So much so that when I met queers in college who talked about their chosen family of people who were not biologically related to them, I was like, oh yeah, you mean your church family. St. Francis United Methodist Church was my first family of choice, filled with non-biological aunties, awkward cousins, and adopted grandparents. They taught me important lessons about how to live in the world, how to love, who to be. Whether I like it or not, there are cute church songs, precious Bible stories, and little nuggets of good old-fashioned Christian shame scattered throughout the foundations of my life. And in my mid-elementary school years, when the rest of my world was filled with bullying, isolation, and damning silence, my church was one of the few places that I could find affirmation. St. Francis United Methodist Church is a mid-sized church in the burgeoning suburb of Cary, North Carolina. On a busy Sunday, there will be anywhere between 200 and 300 members gathered to worship, and on Christmas and Easter, double that number. The architecture says quite a bit about the progressive lilt of the church. The sanctuary is in the shape of a giant ring with an octagon in the center. Large circular windows frame the North Carolina pines, and I'm realizing now other types of deciduous trees. Outside. Green carpeting and marble, gold and brown oak, I think it's oak, I didn't know, and interior courtyards give the sanctuary a warm, earthy vibe. My earliest memories of church aren't of singing or preaching. They're of my butt falling asleep. Back when I was baptized, before we built the current sanctuary, we gathered for church service in what is now the church's multi-purpose room. I don't remember too much about that space other than the folding chairs. Back then, before Cary became the it suburb in North Carolina, we didn't have the luxury of pews. Instead, we'd sit in metal folding chairs for the entire service. The chairs didn't have any padding, just a thin coat of white paint over cold metal. After 30 minutes of sitting still on a metal folding chair, pins and needles were the only sensation I could feel. Everyone struggled with this. By the time the sermon was halfway done, our congregation was a sea of slowly shifting butts, desperately attempting to avoid their fate. As a child, I thought that this was just part of the whole Christianity deal. We hurt our butts for Jesus. It was like we were trying to experience the pain of the crucifixion or something. Or our sore butts were part of our penance, part of atoning for our sins. In those days, our church services ended not with a song, but with a chorus of loud we hurt our butts. We folded the chairs, and we put them back in the tomb. For a few days, they were dead to the world. But the next week, they were back again, Christ-like. A cycle of resurrection, a cycle of atonement, a cycle of cheap metal folding chairs. When we built the new sanctuary and finally got pews, I was shocked. It wasn't the soaring, glorious wooden arches or gigantic circular windows that inspired me. It was the cushioned pews. Suddenly, I could worship Jesus without causing permanent nerve damage. Suddenly, church was comfortable. It was a miracle. All glory to God in the highest. Hallelujah. Church was my refuge, one of the few places where my sensitivity, my creativity, and my penchant for bigger questions and larger feelings were embraced. Those were all parts of myself that I had to silence at karate practice and physical education class and on the playground, but not at church. At church, my love of singing, my proclivity to ask too many questions, and my enthusiasm for arts and crafts were assets. Sure, I was being a little bit of a know-it-all in Sunday school, but I was a know-it-all for Jesus. Yes, I may have been queening out in the church musical, but I was queening out for Jesus, so it was fine. I also really liked God, or at least the idea of God as he was presented to me, because God was a little bit of a queen too. I mean, think about it. He sits up in heaven on a gold throne with a bunch of baroque naked babies flying around him and demands that you worship him and sing him lots of songs, or else he will destroy your entire city and kill all your relatives. Talk about a diva. I mean, like the Old Testament is pretty much just a litany of all the times God threw a diva tantrum in his dressing room because one of his fans coughed during his performance. He's like Naomi Campbell, constantly throwing his phone at the paparazzi, but I support Naomi Campbell. And don't get me started on Jesus. I adored the idea of Jesus. If God is Beyonce, then Jesus was Solange or Stevie Nicks or perhaps Bob Marley. He was a down-to-earth, gentle rebel who wore flowing robes and long curly hair. He preached forgiveness and free love and hung out with prostitutes and hated the government. He gave people free food and turned water into wine to liven up the party. He even had a weird stoner cousin, John the Baptist, who ate elephants at night and lived in the woods, taking people on spiritual journeys in the local river. As a historical figure, Jesus was the best. Despite how much I got along with God and Jesus, I had a complicated reputation in Sunday school. I haven't spoken to any of my former Sunday school teachers to verify this, but I'm fairly certain that I was a little stinker, is the word I'll use. On one hand, I was the pompous teacher's pet. I knew all the answers, was skilled at reading aloud, and had a natural ability to BS when I wasn't quite sure what the teacher was asking. While my classmates were busy sleeping and bored, convinced that Sunday school was a premonition of hell itself, I was perky, energized, and hungry for biblical knowledge that I could use to prove I was better than everyone else and gain favor with my parents. On the other hand, I was a smarty with a budding intellect that I wholly dedicated to asking my Sunday school teachers very difficult questions. Questions like, if God made everything in the whole world, why did he make people sin? Like, he could have just made us so that we'd be nice to each other, right? On a related note, if God made the whole world and everything in it, then is God the one who set things up such that his only son had to die on the cross? That's kind of twisted. Why did God do that? I'm only 7, and I still think that Santa Claus is real, but that strikes me as kind of odd. I've been praying for a new PlayStation for 3 solid weeks, and it still hasn't happened yet. Are you sure God really answers our prayers? God loves everyone and forgives everyone? Okay, then I don't understand why there's a use for hell. Why did God make war? That wasn't very nice of him. Also, why did God make homework? That wasn't very nice of him either. Mary was a virgin and God got her pregnant? What does virgin mean? How are babies made? Can God get me pregnant? Speaking of which, how do we know God is a him? Did God have a pee-pee? Did one of the prophets see it or something? So I'll leave off with that for this reading from the book of Jacob. But as you can see, I have not gotten any more serious in my adult age. And also, I think, that there's a playfulness that we can have about all of this. You know what I mean? I feel that there's a playfulness and a joy and a creativity and a giggle that we can have about all this stuff. And sometimes we lose that. And I think when we lose that, we've already lost. when we forget how to be playful and forget how to joke in the way that I think God loves, sometimes we lose a lot. So I'm going to share one more story, and then we'll get into our little convo. And this is a particularly precious story to me because it's one that I kind of didn't remember too well until I sat down to write the thing. So I'm gonna, let's see, where am I? Okay, here we go. And again, there's like some little shout outs that, very specifically all remember to other people. And so this is from sort of a little bit in the earlier part of the book still, when I'm thinking about, okay, so I think I'm something different, I think I'm gay, how do I talk about that? And that realization happened like 5th, 6th grade, it was pretty early on. And I was trying to figure out, like, how do I communicate that to the world? And some really special things happened. As with most complicated questions in my life at that time, I turned to the church for answers. Despite its setbacks, church youth group was where I first learned what it meant to embrace the more complicated facets of my identity. In fact, youth group was the first place in my life where I came out as gay. In 6th grade, I reached out to Jamie, our assistant youth pastor, and told her I had something I wanted to talk about. The following Sunday after church service, we walked to Java Blue, rest in peace Java Blue, a coffee house and shopping center on Kildare Farm Road, just across the street. I'm still not quite sure why I told Jamie before anyone else. I think, on some level, I knew she would keep what I told her private, that she wouldn't share my secret before I was ready. But it was a big risk, because we never talked about queer desire or homosexuality at church. I didn't really know or actually have a sense of what anyone thought about it. Would she be understanding and nurturing toward me? Or would she try to tell me I was a sinner and attempt to fix me? Would she turn around and call my parents? It was a gamble, but for my own sanity, it felt like a risk I had to take. I asked her to a coffee house because in every TV show I'd seen where two people had serious conversation, it was always in either a coffee house or a restaurant. I knew my allowance wouldn't cover a restaurant, so I thought a coffee house was best. Jamie ordered a cup of coffee, and I ordered a hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. She paid for both, of course. As we sat down to talk, I remember feeling at odds with myself. Coming out to her was simultaneously the most rational and irrational thing I could do. It made no sense. It made perfect sense. I had to get out of it. Sitting on a couch in the coffee house, I told her I knew I was gay, that no one else knew, and that I just needed to tell somebody. Looking back on that moment, I can't begin to imagine how hard this was for her. I can't imagine what I would have done if, as an adult, in Cary, North Carolina in 2004, I had a 12-year-old come out to me. But somehow, Jamie knew just what to do. I saw her demeanor soften. I watched as her face shifted from anxiety to confusion to pity, and ultimately settled on a quiet look of love. Have you told your parents yet? I'm not ready to tell them. I don't think I'll tell them for a while. I just don't think they'd be ready to hear it. They'd probably think it was a phase or something. That's okay, Jacob. You don't have to tell them until you're ready. You don't have to tell anyone until you're ready. A pause. I'm not quite sure what to tell you. I can tell you that you're not alone. I can tell you that you're going to be okay. Okay? Another beat. It felt like hours. Have I ever told you about my friend Pete? We met in college and are still in touch every now and then, and he's gay. From what I know, he's happy. There are other people like you out there. I thought I would start crying, that this would feel like catharsis, but instead, I just felt blank. It was more like shock. It seemed that, at least for a while, things were going to be okay. I tried to respond to her, to say something back, but I just sat there, stunned. Why don't we pray on it? It's what God calls us to do in times of trouble. Jamie took my hand in hers. Dear Lord, I thank you for the light that Jacob brings into this world, for all that he is and for all that he will become. We ask that you bless him and guide him along his journey, that you comfort him and walk beside him down this road. We also ask that you give Jacob the wisdom and love to be courageous, that through him, others may learn of your love for them. Amen. Amen. I sat there, gently shaking, eyes dry, hugging myself. Jamie scooted closer and hugged me, too. Why don't we head back to church? Okay. really tell them about coming out to my parents. I often overlook this experience, overlook my time with Jamie. Perhaps that's because it feels like it doesn't count, because I didn't tell the rest of the world until 4 years later. But I don't think that's really why. I think it's because this story, my first coming out story, doesn't match the template of what coming out is, quote, supposed to be. It's too quiet, too devoid of drama, filled not with rejection or chaos, or with glitter or rainbow streamers, but with a quiet, trepidatious sort of love. Or perhaps it's deeper than that. Perhaps, in my heart of hearts, I know that some moments are too sacred to be recounted without context. So, with that, I think I'll leave it, and I'll stop reading, because I could read forever. And, we're going to miss the one story that I did think about reading that I did want to read, was the one about winning the first annual and only Miss St. Francis drag pageant that happened when I was in 6th grade. And I was the only middle schooler who competed against 3 seniors in high school. And I won. I still have the stash, the pink duct tape at my house, and I should have brought it. Dang it! I cannot believe I should have worn the thing and read the story. That's okay. We'll do a second event. We'll do another event. We'll do a second annual pageant. We'll have a fundraiser. We'll do a whole thing. But yes. Anyway, with that, should we do our little chat? Well, how we dance, because it's like talk show, right? Okay. We didn't have any entrance music. Should I specify entrance music?
That's fine. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking me to come and talk to Jacob. I think this is really fun. He had me laughing. I know you all were laughing.
There were moments where I was like, say that? Should I say that? And I was like, I don't know, whatever. I published something as well.
You're forgiven.
Okay, thank you.
One quick note, similar to Jacob, I also grew up in United Methodist Church. In Florida, however, a little small church, smaller than this, a church would probably fit a third of the sanctuary. Anyway, we had wooden pews, old wooden pews. So unlike the metal chairs, it also hurt. The padding was slightly nice when we finally got it. Many years later. So we have a lot of things in common as we grew up in church. And you kind of mentioned some things earlier, how you grew up. And the book was very, very specific about what St. Francis did for you as you grew up. And so I think as you share that we are trying to also look at the positive, the good side of things, what could you share with St. Francis very specifically were the good things that helped you to be who you are today?
Well, gosh, there's so much. Because I was here, even through senior year of high school, I was here. I got to be physically at the church, at least 7 hours a week or something, right? It was like a part-time job. Between youth group, handbells, prayer works, Bible study, Sunday school, service, sometimes 2 services if I had to perform something, with handbells or with choir. Can I say choir? Choir. I was here so much, and so, there's so many things, both as an artist that this space has given me, right? Because this was my first, so many people who are artists, you start in the church, right? Especially, for singing and for performing and for theater and doing Godspell and, Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, in a mall and Night Visitors. I sang in an opera here in 5th grade, back in my boy soprano days. Yeah, neither of those stuck around. Not too good at being a boy anymore, not too good at being a soprano. And it's I feel like I got so much from this church on a career level, right, if we're being honest, because I feel like half the skills I have in terms of talking to people and reading out loud and being a performer, anytime I get paid to do that these days, I'm thanks, St. Francis, I should probably cut a check. I feel like this church could take manager fees if they wanted to, or some sort of royalties for the time spent or whatever.
Write that down, take manager fees.
bajillion people who are always cheering for you, who are thrilled anytime you accomplish the smallest little thing, you know, who have your back no matter what. And it was so beautiful growing up in this space and having access to that. And then, you know, there were a few years where it kind of got confusing. You know, there were a few years where it wasn't like, and I say this in the book, I say it to everybody, there was never a point where it was like, oh, you're gay, well get out of this building. It was never like that. That was never what was told to me, and I'm very blessed that that was the truth for me. Because back, you know, I mean, even 10 years ago, still today, there are so many people for whom that is their truth, right? That the moment they started to acknowledge who they were, who God made them to be, that their faith community said, you're not welcome here, you can't be part of this. You're not part of our family anymore. You know, kids get kicked out of their homes when they come out as trans or as queer, and they get kicked out of their churches too. You know, they're not only, it's not just your, you know, biological family that can disown you, it's your chosen family, your church family. And that was not my experience. I was really lucky in that way. And you know, I think that there are so many stories that we need to take the time to hear about just the damage that does to people, and just how cruel that can be. And I think that the people who advocate for not having an inclusive church need to hear those stories more often and know the spiritual cost that takes on somebody, and know what it means to tell somebody that they are not fearfully and wonderfully made. You know, there's something really cruel in that. There's something so ungodly in deciding that you get to say whether or not God's creation is good enough, right? Like who are we to say whether or not God made someone properly? I think God did a good job with all of us.
Yeah, it is slightly confusing. Actually, it's not slightly confusing. It's very confusing when you grow up learning that you are loved. Jesus loves you. You sing the song over and over again as a young kid that Jesus loves you,
Right.
no matter what. And you read that everything that God made was good.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, this change occurs of people saying that you aren't good, potentially not a creation of God. That's really confusing.
Right.
Good for St. Francis for being able to do that.
Right.
I had a bit of a similar process of that. I never had that happen to me as well. But I also didn't have the opportunity to come out as early as you did. I sometimes wish I could figure that out.
Although generationally, like, it's already worked out. Like, I already feel like a grandma, like the non-binary.
Oh, we're in the same place.
You know, I'm like, oh my gosh, these kids on Tumblr are coming out at 12. You know, as trans or non-binary, I'm like, hey, I didn't know, hey, what? You know, it's like, I feel like, I'm like, back in mind. Both ways are coming out. You know, like, it's stop. It's true. Yeah, it's true.
But there's also a good to that as well. The fact that so many young people feel like they can be themselves so much earlier in their lives is so much more beautiful.
But it's a challenge to the church, right? Because the reality of what's going on is that we're having a big cultural shift, right? We're living in a time where young people are coming out earlier, and coming into understanding who they are earlier and earlier. And it's not easy for church leaders because, I mean, it used to just be like, okay, only youth group leaders are going to have to deal with this. Maybe like when senior year of high school, right? Like, you know, like, oh, you might be able to even get through the entire youth program with one kid, and maybe they'll just like never say anything about being gay, so everyone kind of knows, you know, and nowadays it's like, okay, cool, so our like children's ministers need to probably know how to talk to kids about gender, because like you might have a 4-year-old being like, yeah, I don't like this body, it doesn't work for me. You know, you might have children like at a very young age having a self-knowledge and being able to name it in a way that we didn't know how to do even a decade ago. And to me, what that I think that does is that calls on us as a church to really address this with the urgency that it deserves. I mean, I don't want to be grim, I don't want to be grave, but we live in a world where rates of self-harm and suicide among young queer and trans kids are through the roof, and statistically, especially for the trans community, are it's not even statistically interesting to be a person who's attempted suicide because it's so common. We live in a world where queer and trans young people, I think especially queer and trans young people who grow up in communities of faith, are at a particular risk for having vastly different life outcomes if their communities of faith don't know how to step up to the challenge. And so for me, it's like, I don't think we have the luxury of time. I don't think we have the luxury of figuring it out slowly. I don't think we have the luxury of being like really deliberate and cautious about our next steps. It's like, look, like, are queer and trans people children of God too? The answer is obviously yes. Do they understand who they are, and are they telling you that? The answer is also yes. So if you say that they're not made exactly as they are, if you tell a kid that who they are isn't right, I mean, what happens to that kid is kind of on you, And I think we need to take accountability for the harm that we've caused as a church.
Yeah.
I think that's a conversation we need to have. When I was on NPR in North Carolina with Frank Stasio to promote my book, which I was in New York for my book release, but they did an interview remotely, and I did it at the actual national NPR offices, and I was like, I'm already here, can I be on those shows too? Hello? This is rude. Come to the buffet, you can have 3 things. Anyway, but I was on NPR with Frank Stasio, and it was so uncomfortable because we have the whole interview, and I'm trying to be like, I'm fun and perky, the book's fun and perky, buy it, and at the very end, he's like, so the Methodist Church recently said blah, 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 and the last minute, I have 1 minute left of the interview, and he's like, so what would you say to church leaders? And I would just be like, I was like, okay, well, let me take my gloves off first, throw them away forever, and I was just like, well, I mean, the church honestly, I think the church has in some ways, metaphorically, has real guilt, has real blood on its hands, because the actual violence happens to people, it's actual violence. It's not just spiritual harm, it's actual violence. It's real physical harm, and we can stop it.
Yeah, you're right. And as you said, that we don't have a lot more time to keep figuring this out. We've been talking about this for decades.
Right.
Decades. And I won't even go to the other stuff before that, that we still haven't solved. So time, we don't really have a whole lot of time. We have young people that really want to live in who they are, and they want to be part of the church. So who is the church going to be now? What do you think our church is today?
Well, I mean, I feel just insurmountably blessed to be in this congregation and to be part of this community. Because the beauty of my relationship with St. Francis is that, it came full circle. You know what I mean? I'm not just here now, I come back when I'm home. I come wearing whatever weird outfit I want. Y'all put up with me, thank you, praise God. And I feel like it's such a model for what other communities of faith can be. Even ones that maybe don't start out being known as that hippie Methodist church. Because in every town there's the ones that are known as that's a really progressive church. But even churches that are just kind of I guess people would probably think about St. Francis sort of progressive, but still relatively normal Methodist church. And we have this community that's capable of transformation and capable of affirmation and capable of love and generosity and kindness and sweetness and goodness. And I just think that that's what our church can be for everybody. I think it's not that far away. It's also not that complicated. I mean, theologically, you can wrap your head into knots forever about this thing, right? You can think about it can be as complicated as you want to make it out to be. But I think when it comes to who we're called to be in Christ and by God, I rely heavily on the fact that the Holy Spirit is still with us, right? That the Holy Spirit guides us and helps us understand how to take this beautiful book that we have and put it into the world we live in today, right? I mean, I feel that the Holy Spirit is moving through all of the work that we do together. I feel that, divine prophecy doesn't stop. It didn't close forever when people have been revising the Bible for centuries, for millennia, right? like we continue to grow, we continue to get closer to God, we continue to learn what it means to love God and love ourselves and love Christ in the world we live in today. And I think it's time that we stop being so bashful about our conviction to love. Yeah. And that we start being prouder to say that we love all. Yeah.
I'll tell you a story. It's an education story, teaching. So I came into my classroom one day, and on the board was written WWJD. And I was like, what is this on the board? I thought somebody wanted to have a conversation about Jesus. I was so as a state employee, I'm like, oh gosh, I can't go that deep into that. But I said, who wrote this? Nobody said anything. And then I said, who wrote this? Like, oh, let's talk about it. And someone said, I did. I said, what does this mean? And he said, what would Jefferson do? And I use it now every day. I think we all have to ask ourselves, what would we really do? And if we go back to really ask ourselves, what would Jesus really do? I mean, there really isn't a whole lot of options. Right? There really isn't a whole lot of options. Like I said, we can turn words around and scripture and make it mean anything. I'm an academic. I actually know that. You can make anything pretty much mean any way you intend it to. But the underlying meaning is pretty much the same underlying meaning, right? Translations. We, at our church at Avent Ferry, we had a Bible giveaway a few times as our outreach, and this one guy came over and said, I'm looking for a King James Version Bible. And we had King James versions, we had all types, we even had Spanish and everything else. And he said, I'm looking for King James Version, but we're out of King James versions. And he said, well, that's the only one I need. That's the only one that's the true meaning of the scripture. And at that point, I had to call the pastor over. Because I knew she could answer that question a whole lot better than I could, because this was not the first translation.
Some monk from like 1000 AD is like really grumpy right now. Right. No, my translation was the right one. Trying to like German or whatever, like yelling at us in German, like 10th century German.
Yeah. So what does it really mean? And what does it mean for the time? What does our Bible mean for us in our time, like today, for such a time as this, right? So we kind of are running out of time, I think, and our young people want to be involved.
And I think the beautiful challenge that we have today is, and it's funny, people will ask me a lot, like, what do I think about the General Conference decision, blah, 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 like, I get asked that all the time. It's funny because, if anything, I feel like I learned a lot from, like, HB2, right? I don't want to get too political about it all, but, like, I feel like HB2 is a silly law. And what happened is that North Carolina has this law being like, trans people shouldn't be anywhere, right? Like, that's basically the law. Or like, trans people should, like, you should go in the bathrooms that you're uncomfortable in and don't belong in, but you should do it because it's on your birth certificate, whatever. Anyway, it's this big national thing. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, North Carolina is so backward. And I walk in like this, and people are like, where'd you grow up? And I'm like, North Carolina. And they're just like, oh my goodness. What was that like? It must be awful. Oh, and I'm just like, oh no, you don't know, like you don't know anything. And the real thing that happened from that is that it really forced people to figure out who they are, right? Like, I still think, I'm still shocked. Like, Raleigh and Durham and Chapel Hill have more gender-neutral bathrooms that are explicitly gender-neutral, that went explicitly that way to be trans-affirming when HB2 happened, than I get in Los Angeles. Like, truly, I'm not making that up. And so I guess what I feel is that actually with this, we have an opportunity, right? I think that for the longest time as a Methodist church, it was easy to sort of say, well, we neither fall here nor there. You have your own feeling about it. We practice what we like within our congregation, and that's going to be enough. And it wasn't enough, right? Because when we live in a world that that tells people that they should be ashamed of who they are. It takes radical love to overcome that shame. But I think that now we live in with this general conference decision, I actually think it's an opportunity. It's a chance for us to clarify and be very specific and in no uncertain terms say what we believe. And I believe that everyone should be welcome in their congregation. I believe that everyone is loved by God. I think it's time that every church stand up and say, we explicitly believe that all gay people, all lesbian folks, all bisexual people, trans folks, queer folks, non-binary, are all welcome here in love. So I hope, I know that there's like some murmurings that St. Francis is thinking about becoming like officially a reconciling United Methodist congregation. And I'm not trying to like 300 like Sparta you off the cliff. But I kind of hope that it'll happen. And I want to put a lot of pressure on people, but I don't want to put no pressure on anybody. And I think, if people are waiting for a wake-up call, look at the statistics, look at the violence that trans people face in this world, look at the mental health of the LGBTQ community, look at how discrimination impacts us, and know that Christ calls us always to be with those who are oppressed. Christ calls us to be with those who are marginalized, and right now, it's pretty clear who we need to stand with.
Amen.
Amen.
There's a lot of work that the church has to do, not just locally, but globally. There are a lot of things, and I've said this in some of my talks, is that we kind of need to learn from history a little bit to know where we were and where not to go. You kind of mentioned that in your book as well. We kind of have to learn from our history in order to kind of know where we need to go. We don't want to make the same mistakes. I think we're kind of making some mistakes. I think a lot of people came out of the woodwork after this last general conference vote and decision. It kind of made me wonder, where were you before? Have you ever thought about that? Like, where were you before?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the feelings that I've had to struggle with the longest, I think. Is that, it's sort of this feeling, and I feel like a lot of us share this, a lot of, LGBTQ folks in the church feel this way. It's just kind of like, where was like this clarity when I was most vulnerable? And it's not, and what I've had to do is really take the time to figure out what empathy really means. And empathy means forgiving people for not knowing how to love you when you needed them most. And forgiveness and kindness and transformational love looks like saying, I needed you at a point in my life and was failed by so many of these institutions, so many people. And it hurt. And we're going to move forward in God's love together. And we're going to get through that. We're going to name it, we're going to honor it, but we're going to get through it, and we're going to build something better on the other side. So I think there's a lot of folks who are feeling that way. There's a lot of people who are like, where were you? Because this need isn't new. We're just talking about it in a different way.
Exactly. And the positive part of that is that all of a sudden, I hear all these people want to do more things. That's the other side that you talk about. Like, why we're up here first is we want to talk about things that are good, the positive things that you all have done to help Jacob.
These little ribbons are great.
Really, really great.
People love them on Instagram.
They do.
I had Instagram the little ribbons, and I was like, they were at the front of my church when I went in for service most recently, and the gag is, I didn't even put them there. Someone else did.
There's growth in that. There's growth in that.
Right.
Jacob and I talked earlier, one thing that we were lucky to have is a strong foundation as a United Methodist. Young person, confirmed person, teenager, college student.
Yeah.
Now, I don't really know what I am now. I'm not young professional anymore. I'm not young with such strong upbringing in their faith. So that when we did come out, it was a struggle, but at least we still knew we had a foundation. Some young people don't have that strength. They haven't been built up like that. What would you say to a young person coming out without having a congregation like St. Francis or Franklintown for me, and now Avent Ferry? Like, what do you think you would say to a young person?
Well, I mean, if we're being honest, the first thing I'd say is protect yourself. You know, that you don't, and that's one of the things I sort of went on to say about what my conversation with Jamie was so important for, is that when I was, you know, the metaphor of the closet to me feels kind of limited. I prefer a shell, the metaphor of like a shell, because you're like a snail and you carry it with you everywhere you go, and you always like, you know, you could go in and out of it at points in your life, and when you feel threatened, you go into your shell, right? And then when you feel safe, you come out of it, right? I like that metaphor better. But growing up, you know, with this idea of the closet, I felt like I was lying by not telling people who I was. And the thing that was really beautiful about my conversation with Jamie was that she was very clear about, like, you're not lying to anybody. You don't owe this to anybody until you're ready to share, until you feel safe enough to share. And so I'd say to young folks, like, it's okay to take your time with this. There can often be this sense that, like, you have to share everything about who you are the moment you realize it. And if you don't, you're failing the LGBTQ movement, right? Like, you're a failure for our community. And that just isn't realistic. It's just not empathetic, it's not kind. So I think it's really important to take your time and to protect yourself, because if you know that the community that you're part of is going to give you a really, really difficult time, it's okay to stay in your shell as long as you need to. But also, it's important to find places where you can come out of that shell. It's important to find places where you can be safe. And then if and when you feel strong enough to return to those communities and try to teach them the transformational love that you've learned, which is a radical act of love. I mean, queer and trans people returning to communities of faith that hurt us is a radical act of love. To say, I'm still here and I want to help you understand what I've come to know about God. It's radical, transformational, and beautiful. But to say, when you're ready, you can do that. But no pressure, and you take your sweet time. And if you can only come back when you're 70 and the cutest little trans granny that anyone's ever seen, and you go back when you're 70 and you say, hey, none of y'all know me anymore, but I grew up in this church and I'm ready to teach you something. And I have some great clip-on earrings now.
And I think that's true. I think also our churches, that what we grew up in, they taught us a lot about who we actually are. We both were very lucky in that. I talk about Franklintown all the time now. I call my sister and I say, I just had a conversation about Franklintown. And she's like, what'd you say now? Good things, because there were good things. You should be proud of that. And you should be proud of where you go next. Because there is a next. And then there's going to be a next. And then there's going to be a next. Like, we're never really done, I don't think. Do you think you're done?
Well, I'll be done when the Holy Spirit stops telling me things to do. And I don't think the Holy Spirit stops doing it.
I'm not done.
I'm not going anywhere else. I'm fire that hangs around.
Like the Phoenix?
That was my high school mascot.
Mine was a pirate.
I'm trying to anyway. So I think we're supposed to go to Q&A now.
That sound good?
Yes.
All
Yes.
right. So, Claire and I have microphones. Maybe I'll figure out if Paris work. Thank you. So if you'll just raise your hand, we'll bring you a microphone.
Thanks, Jacob. It's so funny. It's such entertaining and so important. So you talked a lot about transformation, which obviously is hugely important for your life and all of our lives. And you talked about the word, what's next. And so
thought like, how am I going to get health insurance this year? Because I'm like, ooh, I woke up this morning and I was like, like back pain's a thing. Yeah, that's 28's the time when that starts for people. No, but I hope one day I get to have a whole shelf of books that I wrote. That'd be fun. At least like a little chunk. And more generally, when I think about kind of legacy and what we want to leave behind, I hope to leave behind a world where just when we talk about this stuff, when we're like 70, people just think it's kind of ridiculous.
Right.
I'd love to live in a world where people were like, churches used to kick kids out for being gay. Like what? People like they used to tell you that like being trans meant you weren't part of God's creation. Like what? They just be like, that's weird. Like that's so weird. That's quirky. That they can like be so far removed from that kind of trauma and from that sadness that it feels quirky and kind of just strange and peculiar. Like the idea of like a carrier pigeon. Of like, oh, you just like tie little letters onto like a pigeon's foot and then send it, and the pigeon would know where to go next. That's like when I think about legacy, like that's the kind of world I want to leave behind. And the other thing I feel about legacy is, I'll have done my job, because this is how movements work, right? I'll have done my job when I get to join that great human pyramid of people just standing on each other's shoulders, right? Like all I want to do is just be a real solid base. And I got backgrounds, but I can be a solid base in the metaphorical human pyramid. And I think that's all any of us can aspire to be, right? Like not to be remembered specifically, but to be remembered as part of a thing. And to have all these other people that you get to like volley up and lift up and get to live these lives filled with joy and like, and live in the world that you helped build for them. Yeah. And I also want to live in a world where there isn't such a sense of surprise when I tell people I still go to church. That'd be nice. Because people are always like, what? You? In that? And I'm like, yeah, what's so weird about that? And they're like, that's still very weird to me. And I'm like, okay, we're going to work on that. But yeah, so that's what I hope. I did recently, and I'm not going to like, shame talk about it. Just because I've been getting their hopes up. No one get your hopes up. Promise can have a group compact, because I don't want to jinx anything. But I think that the specific vignette is fun, which is that we abstractly, still a million steps from it actually happening, but pitch a potential TV show adaptation of this book. It's not going to happen yet. No one get excited, okay? It's like we're a million steps away from that. But the pitch starts with like a me-inspired character in graduation, like in their graduation robe in church on graduation Sunday, playing handbells and lipstick. And I think that is something that America needs, and I would like to give that gift to everyone. And truly, the people we were pitching to were like, it was sort of like, okay, what? And like their heads kind of tilted with each attitude, and they like fell out of their chairs. It was great.
Might not be too far off.
We'll see.
Questions?
Oh gosh, there's the cameras that's gonna go on stuff. Okay. If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
You have to answer this one too.
That was meant for you.
I'll answer first, but you can also answer. I mean, it's related to what I already said, I think, which is just like, hey kiddo, take your time. I felt like I was in such a rush to like tell everybody exactly who I was, and then the joke is that I got way ahead of myself and hadn't even fully landed yet. Like my poor parents, I had to come out to y'all like 12,000 times with 12,000 different things. Well, it got to the point where it just sort of like, you reach the point where there's just, okay, well, there's just no expectations anymore. We just don't know what you're going to show up in, like when you come home from college in terms of like what you're going to wear. Like, because I feel like I thought when I knew who I was or landed on a new part of who I was like, cool, like I got it. And then after you declare that to everybody very loudly and make a whole big deal out of it, then you're like, oh no, there's like 5 other parts that I'm also learning about. And you eventually learn to be like, oh, this thing is less a one-time deal and more just like a lifelong unfurling of some beautiful tapestry or some other elegant metaphor. And I guess that's what I tell myself is like, you're gonna be learning about who you are for the rest of your life. And it's important to share who you are with the world and with the people around you. But like, ooh, you can slow down a little if you want. You can speed up if you want to, but if it feels good to slow down a little, like you don't have to carry this whole banner for everybody, that might be nice, because then you can just be a teenager for a second and, go like hang out with your friends in the mall or something instead of meeting with the bishop and trying to convince him to do, better youth programs for kids that's coming out, and then he condescendingly tries to pastor you, and you're like, no, I'm trying to pastor you. And then you get this weird little back and forth in what is now the art room of your high school, because my Raleigh charter bought the old Methodist conference building. It was really weird, because I was like, walking there, and it was like the sort of back in the day, please excuse me, it was like kind of Temple of Doom. I was like, oh gosh, I'm going in there and I have to talk to the bureaucrats about how they can save children's lives, like young people's lives. And they'd be like, oh, you're a little teenager, let's talk to you about Jesus. And I was like, I already know about Jesus, that's why I'm trying to talk to you. And this whole thing, now I come into my high school and there's like an AR teacher teaching art in the former bishop's office, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on.
How about that? Change. What would I say? My mom would always tell me to hold my head up. Whenever I left the house, whenever I went to school, she'd walk with her head up. If mom said for me to do it, you just do it. Like, there was no question about just do it. But I had no idea what that really meant. Like, not really. Looking back on that now, to be thankful who you are, love who you are, hold your head up, always. You're covered. There are people that cover you and love you. And the other people don't really always matter. So always hold your head up. Know who you are. Just be who you are. Just don't worry about the people around you. I used to be bullied when I was in middle school and high school, and I remember always walking down the corridor, going to my first class, always with these people standing on the side, morning, had no little click, and I would always be afraid to walk through those group of people. And I would always hear it in the back of my mind, my mom would say, hold your head up. And so I would just, and I would just walk through it because I knew I was smarter than them anyway. So honestly, just learn to love who you are. Learn to hold your head up. Don't let people pull you down. Always hold your head up.
Do you really think that Duke was a poor match for you, Jacob?
Yes, but only in so much as the thing about going to Duke is that you really functionally go to school in Connecticut, and you have to deal with people from Connecticut or New Jersey or California or whatever coming out here and sort of like doing their version of what they think Southern culture is. And they're sort of like these frat boys being like, I'm a Southern frat boy, and I'm like, you're from New Jersey and you don't understand anything about Southern culture. Like, if I served you collard greens, you'd be like, ew, those are gross, Like, you would, I remember my freshman year, we had like a catered dinner for some class I was in or something, which it's Duke. Tuition is ridiculous, but you do get a few free dinners if you know how to run around campus together. And they had hush puppies, and some girl was like, I didn't know how proud I was to be a Southerner, until some girl was like, oh, hush puppies, like, ugh. And I almost started yelling. I had this anger came up in this rage, this biblical rage. It was like, well, I'm feeling Old Testament right now. Like, I could strike down a whole village with this kind of hush puppy anger. Yeah, so there were parts that didn't fit so well, but overall, I think that either I would have been in a school where I was totally comfortable being me and exploring my gender and whatever, and then wouldn't have been challenged in all the ways that sort of gave me the grit and the spunkiness and the tools that I have, the translational tools, right? Because you learn to be a translator when you exist in a culture that doesn't fully understand you. So there's a way I could have gone to one of those, I could have gone to some school where that would have been the case. And there would have been things about that would have been wonderful, right? There would have been things about that would have been gentle and kind to me at a time in my life. Maybe I deserved a little gentleness and kindness. But as it were, I was in a crucible, and I walked through the fire and managed to come out the other side a little stronger. So there were But if you think about sending your kids to Duke, I have a primer that I have to give you. I learned a lot of good things.
I'm sure.
The class is perfect.
Hey, Jacob.
Hi.
So my question, I also obviously grew up in the area and only recently came out to my sweet evangelical parents as a queer woman. And I think their church is really starting to straddle that line, right? Of they're not ready to be affirming, but they have started using welcoming language. And I think that's a really tough spot for a congregation to be sitting and not being ready to be one thing or the other. And I think it can also be harmful for folks who are walking in and not sure what room they're in, right? And so I think, what would you say to churches, both of you, who are in that, like, well, we want people to be welcome, but, maybe you can't lead a small group, right? Or if you, where it's not clear where the line is, like, can you be ordained? Can you, and that are really in that space? I'm curious for your thoughts.
Well, it's not easy. It's really delicate, and it requires a great deal of, I think, even congregational specificity, right? Like, you have to be able to know, even within your church, like, what are the sort of politics of this space? And that was one of the things that was so difficult for me in, like, late high school. And one of the reasons why I kind of lost my enthusiasm for the church for a minute, because it became a political battleground for me. It became a politics space. It became a place where I was like, okay, gotta go back and do more structural advocacy, blah, blah, blah. Like, it became yet another space that I was an activist in, and another space that I was trying to do policy change within, rather than a place where I could be and focus on my spiritual development and my relationship with God. And so I think, the first thing I'd say is, like, when you're in that space, it's like, don't forget that your number one priority at church, because it is your right to have it be your number one priority, because you deserve to have it be your number one priority, no matter who you are, is your relationship with God and your relationship with Christ, right? And that you deserve for that to stay central if you want it to be that. And you don't have to hold that burden for your completely alone, all on your own, right? And if it feels exhausting, it's okay to take care of yourself. And if trying to tip that scale and working to, like, help others understand a more radical version of Christ's love is weighing on you and is heavy, you gotta take care of yourself. It's biblical to take care of yourself. Self-care is biblical, right? At some point, it's okay to sit there and let someone wash your feet, right? It's okay to take a moment, you can take moments for rest. Even Christ rested, and Christ was God, So I think that kind of self-care and that kind of love for yourself is really important. You can't lose it in the process of trying to change things. And then more generally, it can be a really long process. And it can take a lot of patience. And I only say that because, I don't think I have a more specific answer. I don't know. I feel like it's a congregation thing. And the main thing is, like, if you're working on it in your church, is to remember to be kind to yourself and to practice love for yourself.
Yeah, and I would also say that it really. So Avent Ferry just went through this process last year, and we became reconciled community first, so that there was a group that was supported and a group that was there to help support each other, and that's okay. You don't have to. It's like turning a ship. It's really hard to turn a ship really fast. It's almost impossible. So sometimes I think we fight the things that are almost impossible to do quickly. You just have to take the time sometimes. So in that sense, sometimes having a small group that can just be that group that is the presence in the church is the first start. If there's the start of people trying to figure out how to use welcoming language, that's actually good. That's actually really good. That's just step one. There are a bunch of other steps, but that's step one. At least people are trying. And eventually more people will try and more people will see. But think about it as turning a big ship. It's just not going to turn quickly. Heck, we have been trying to turn the United Methodist Church for hundreds of years. It still hasn't fully turned. Right?
Like oil tanker.
It's a huge oil tanker, and it has all these things that are falling off. But all these big like trailers and things are falling off. It's okay to move. It's okay to go with a pace. But it's also really important to have a presence. Because it's with your presence that people begin to see that there is a need for a change. If we leave, nothing will ever change. But it's your presence. People see how dedicated you are to your faith. They're going to wonder, well, why are they so, why don't they just give up? Right? Because that's not what Jesus wants us to do. We're supposed to go out and make disciples for the transformation of the world. So it has to start somewhere. And if those are the little things that are starting, that's actually okay. You know, next time, put out some little flyers. Next time, have an event. Next time, bring people in. You don't have to do it yourself. There are other people that have been doing things that can help you share news and stories with people. So let it take its course, and then make a decision, and then help it move fast. But just start turning the wheel. It's okay.
You can also just show up in high heels and see what everyone does.
Exactly.
Or get like a particularly gay haircut. Some people do. Sunny and I are like best friends and go back a long time, so there's a joke there that's very personal.
Inspiring to me, and I can't tell you how many times I laughed out loud reading it at home. My question to you is, what authors or producers or movies or books have you read or seen recently that made you really think, that inspired you, that we also should know about?
Okay. So I think, there is such a beautiful canon of like queer and trans memoir out there. And I think that for learning about a community that you don't necessarily know a ton about, memoir is like one of the most powerful tools. And the reason memoir is so powerful, and the reason that's what I wanted to do, is because memoir is one of the few places, and this is just, I think, historically true across most of, at least American history, and I think probably throughout the world this is true, is that memoir is one of the first places often where people of difference, or people facing oppression, or people, facing challenges, or trying to create change in the world, are able to tell their story fully in their own terms. And so I think there's something really powerful about memoir as a tool for social change, and that's why, over the course of history, it's been used to great effect. Look at Frederick Douglass. That's a memoirist right there, there's so many, look at Gloria Steinem, look at all these people who use personal writing to really shift how we understand the world. So I can throw a few names at you. I don't want to over, because the reading list can get real deep real fast. But Leslie Feinberg is a gender non-conforming trans author who also was a butch lesbian at a certain point, a bold dyke at other points. I don't know if I'm saying the same thing, but that's how Leslie identified, so it's fine. I think that their writings are so incredible because they aren't just modern, right? There's this idea that every book about a trans person has been published in the last 10 years, and that ain't true. Leslie's been publishing for a very long time. Kate Bornstein is another really wonderful person to read. You can go read some James Baldwin if you want to learn a little bit more about what it's like to feel spiritually queer in this world. You can go read, and James Baldwin's such a source of inspiration for me. You can go read Audre Lorde. You can read Janet Mock's memoir. There's just books on books on books. And another book that's particularly really lovely, because it's very contemporary, and I think it's wonderful, is it's called Real Queer America. It's by my friend Samantha Allen, who we did plethora of content that you can watch out there these days. There's lots of reality shows. There's Pose on FX, there's Transparent, and those stories are great too. But just beware of the Hollywoodification of them, because there's sort of there's a shimmer, there's like a layer of glitter that's kind of added to all the crevices, and you don't get to really see them for what they are all the time. And everyone's like a little bit prettier than everyone is in real life, and everyone's like a little bit more well spoken. So take Hollywood depictions of trans and queer folks for what they are. But they're also a lovely tool if you want to not feel like you're doing too much work and engage. It's like you want to engage and also take a break. You can kind of two birds, one stone it. Although I heard a really great thing. They were like, who's throwing stones at birds? Like, why are you throwing stones at birds? Why do you use that idiom? And someone told me, you can say two birds, one stone, because you're feeding them. And I was like, I love that. You get more birds with baked goods than stones. Anyway.
So I have a question in terms of the pronoun they.
Yes.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh my gosh, sorry, I was looking way deep enough. Yes.
The pronoun they.
Yeah, so I use they, them pronouns, and it's not that complicated, linguistically. I mean, if you think about it, we use singular they, because we don't have a singular gender-neutral pronoun to call people, right? We only have he or she. So you got to kind of make do with what you have, right, and sort of repurpose something. And the reality is that, we've, I think, culturally and colloquially, in casual English, have reappropriated they as both a plural or singular pronoun for a very long time. This conversation is also very difficult to have, partially because we don't value grammar education as much as we perhaps should, and some people are just like, yo, what's a pronoun again? And I'm like, to be fair, if I were not trans, I would probably not be, I would have been like, I don't remember either, because it kind of goes the way of algebra. I'm like, parabolas, how do I don't know, I couldn't draw one today. So if you're feeling a little like, that's a lot of grammar language, you're not alone. But yeah, there's if you think about it, if you're talking about someone's friend, you don't know who that friend is, you casually, you'd be like, oh, where'd they go? And oh, it registers as singular, not a big thing. And so, I get that formally, in formal English, they and them is a plural thing. But I think it's so okay to make, English is our tool, right? It's a language is our tool. We get to choose how we make meaning of it. And if you don't like people sort of making up words or retooling words, then you can't read any more Shakespeare ever. Because that dude was always doing it, to the point where it was annoying. Probably for his audience at the time. Anyway, I use they, them pronouns because it just feels like a way to not be linguistically or by language put in a box. Because, this sort of oh, you're a boy, you need to be a man, thing has kind of followed me around for my whole life, and it makes things just kind of oscillating between sort of irritating and annoying to very difficult. And so it's if we can use language that makes it a little bit easier to navigate the world, if we can change restroom signs in a way that just makes it a little bit easier to navigate the world, I mean, it's it's only a plastic sign, it's only one word, and it makes a world of a difference for other people. And what I'll say about pronouns more generally is that for anyone who's trying to learn how to use pronouns to be more trans-inclusive, messing up is part of the game, and it doesn't ever fully stop. So just know that if you ever use the wrong pronoun for somebody on accident, or offend somebody, or make someone know that I've done that too, and continue to do it, because some of my friends are still changing their pronouns, and I can't keep up because it's hard to remember names, let alone pronouns. So just know that you're not alone, and it's not a morality test, it's just try as best you can, and if you don't succeed at all times, have faith that a lot of people can hear your intentions. If you come at someone with a really good energy and you're using the wrong pronouns, odds are they'll be able to hear your intention, but it's still worth trying. So I use they, them pronouns, but if you get it wrong, also especially for people who grew up with me and have been using he pronouns for me for the first 2.5 decades of knowing me, y'all get a special pass that other people don't. Because you raised me and that's how justice works. And so, in this congregation, I'm much more comfortable with he than I am in pretty much any other room in the world, because I'd be like, excuse me, you need to show me some respect to other people. But y'all don't owe me any respect at this point. Because A, look at me, and B, you raised me. So it's not fun to yell at your adopted family. should know better. So anyway, that's how I feel about it. Like, I don't want to, the main thing is, like, people shouldn't walk on eggshells about all this trans stuff. Like, walking on eggshells is just, it's not a fun way to live, and trying is what matters, and messing up is part of the game. And when you mess up, the best thing you can do is just be a little bit chill about it, and like, don't get weird. Because everyone's, like, being trans is a very weird experience to begin with, and everyone's always weird around you, because they don't know what to do without, like, a stumble on a dress. So the more you can reduce weirdness in somebody's life, the greater kindness you can get. Yeah.
So I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Given the past 50 years since Stonewall, especially since this was the 50th anniversary of it, and trans people did throw the first stone, where do you see the movement going in the next 50 years, and what would you like to see the movement focusing on next? Is that specifically church? Is that community engagement? What?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like my sort of movement approach is actually very grounded in my theological approach in terms of service and community. And it's important for us to always center the least of these, right? It's important for us to think about the Beatitudes when we're building a movement, and think about who are the folks who are most marginal right now, who are the folks who are experiencing the greatest isolation, where is the greatest pain, and what can we as Christians, as folks in the LGBTQ movement, as allies, do for those people. And right now, people that are experiencing brutality that is in some ways to me unimaginable. I mean, that looks like trans people who are in detention facilities, it looks like trans people who are incarcerated, it looks like trans and queer people of color who face sort of multiple kinds of oppression and multiple kinds of structural challenges. It looks like queer and trans people in poverty. It looks like queer and trans people in rural areas. And I think, you know, one of the things that I have the greatest gripe about with the LGBTQ movement is that, I don't know when it happened, but in this sort of seeking of legal rights, we were so dedicated to seeming normal that we erased people who seemed like they were struggling. You know, the idea that every gay man is like an attractive white guy married to another attractive white guy, and they live in Manhattan in their duplex. Like, that's ridiculous. That's not our community at all. I mean, there are some people in our community for whom that is true, but that is not the majority of us. And it's important for us to realize that those are not the people, they can be great allies in helping and in funding this movement and in supporting each other, but that's not the reality for most of our community. So I want us to think, I mean, who in the queer and trans community would Christ reach out to? You know, and it would be trans sex workers, right? It would be trans people in detention. It would be folks on the margins, because that's who Christ chose to be his disciples, right? That's how it works. And then more generally, like the little fantasy I have is that I'll be sitting down with like my grandchildren or whatever, and I'll be on some porch. It'll be wraparound. It'll be probably in Durham, maybe in Cary. I don't know yet. Don't make me fight that one. I'll be in some sort of flowing caftan type garment. I will be maybe sipping a mint julep. We'll see. I might have a cane. If I do, it's bedazzled. And I will be talking to my little grandchildren. Well, when I came out, and they'll say, "What's that? What was that? What is coming out again? How did that work back in the day?" That's so weird. Mappa or grandmappa or whatever. Like, that's very strange that you had to do this ritual thing where you told your parents who you were going to date instead of just dating somebody. That's very, you didn't just say, "Oh, I have a boyfriend." You had to be like, "By the way, in the next 5 years, I may hypothetically bring home a boyfriend." Before you did it, you had to be like, "By the way, hypothetically, I may choose to wear a dress sometime in the next 2 years." They just do, right? That queerness and transness will just be doing, rather than having to like think so much about it. It would be effortless, because we live in a world that's beautiful. That's what I hope. Okay.
So Jacob, in your book, you talk about people who mentored you, your grandmother, your next door neighbor, and so forth. In your career, when you're out talking amongst various people, do you have individuals that come up to you and say, "Hey, you inspired me to do this, or you mentored me to do this"? And how does that still, young adult, so to speak.
Well, it does happen sometimes, because that's by virtue of sort of living a public life, right? Like sort of opting into a public life. It sort of comes with the territory. And it happens sometimes in comments. Like people will be like, "Oh, like I read your book and blah blah blah." And then I have these moments where I'm just like, "Whoa!" Like they're very much God moments of like connecting with this complete stranger about something that's so like beautiful and powerful. But I guess they make me uncomfortable, and here's why. It's not because I am not good at taking credit for things that I do. I'm too good at that. You heard the bio in the beginning. I'm very good at just being like, hello! I'm not modest. That's not, I try. No, I don't even try. So it's not that. It's because of two things. One is because I don't like when we, as a culture, teach people that their icons or their heroes or whatever did something for them. Because if you read someone's book, if you read a book, I don't know, for example, the Bible, right? And it helped you, and you changed because of it, it's not the book that changed you, it was you that changed you. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that I just want people to be like, I read